Welcome back to our discussion of IELTS at home. For our first video, we talked about the preparation, the registration. This time around, we're going to focus on the 4 subtests. If you're going to take IELTS on paper or IELTS on computer, there is a possibility that speaking might be scheduled on a different day. But what about IELTS at home? So now we're going to ask Miss Stel to share with us her experience. So in the case of Miss Stel, when you took IELTS at home, did you finish all the 4 subtests in one day, or did you take the speaking subtest on a different day? And if ever speaking and written exams were scheduled on the same day, were they conducted like one after another? Which one came first? So please tell us more about your experience.
Okay, so actually the schedules for home test at home is done in 2 days. So in during your registration, you are made to choose already your schedules. So on day 1, I was able to schedule my speaking test. I was given the time that I would prefer, and all I had to do was check on the time. Now, my listening, reading, and writing was done on the second day. Again, same thing. They will ask you for the preferred time, and all you have to do is locate the time that you prefer, and that's how it was.
Okay, for the written exams, would you remember if it started like at 9 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, or 5 or 6 in the evening?
Okay, so I actually chose 11 o'clock in the morning. So we started at 11 and we ended at 2 p.m.
Okay, what about the speaking subtest? Because obviously you're taking the IELTS at home. If you remember the options, what was the earliest possible time slot and what was the latest?
Okay. When I received the email, there was already a designated schedule, like 11 to 12. So the only choices I had were 11 to 11:20, 11:20 to 11:40, and 11:40 to 12. So I chose the 11 to
So
11:20.
if I remember vividly, you said it's speaking, which
Yes.
came first, right?
Yes.
So this time, let's talk about your speaking experience. Like when you had the examination, was it the examiner who greeted you right away, or was there a test invigilator or test supervisor who spoke to you first and then endorsed you to the examiner? Please tell us more.
Okay. So actually on the first day, because this is the first time that you're going to activate your test schedules, a prompter comes up and requests you to do pre-test clearances. So that is going to be done according to the prompts. All you have to do is follow it. They will check your systems, and then within I think 10 minutes from the time you completed, you will now have to wait for for further instructions. In my particular case, I was greeted already by the examiner. So that from the time we started, it was already with the examiner the whole time.
Okay. For IELTS examination on paper or IELTS on computer, speaking examination lasts for about 11 to 14 minutes. What about your experience taking IELTS at home for the speaking subtest? Was it also roughly 11 to 14 minutes?
Okay, so if I remember right, when we started, we started at a certain time, and by the time it ended, we consumed I think 20 the whole 20 minutes, because in between there were also reminders for things I should be doing, or things that I should be, if I have to speak louder, or things that that you will not be allowed to do. And what I forgot to tell you earlier is that you will not be allowed to wear any headset. So you will have to speak directly to your mic, because the headsets might allow for some cheating. So definitely the headsets are off. So from there, you will be speaking directly to your examiner, and everything goes live.
So for IELTS on paper, some candidates are wearing face masks. Also the same for IELTS on computer. So even if it's done via video conferencing, IELTS candidates had to wear face masks. But in your case, when you took IELTS at home, did you wear face mask as well?
No, we were not required because you're technically at home. Yeah. So there is none.
So when you prepared for the examination, there's IELTS Speaking Task 1, Speaking Task 2, Speaking Task 3. Would you say that the format is exactly the same for IELTS at home? And if there were differences, would you mind telling us what these differences were?
Well, it's exactly the same. It went through the same process that that in terms of when I do my review, it's like actually talking to my reviewer. So it's the same, part 1, part 2, and part 3. Okay.
Anything interesting you'd like to share in task 1? Like, were there 3 topics, 3 questions each? Because typically for IELTS on paper and IELTS on computer, task 1 lasts for about 5 minutes. So the examiner usually asks 3 topics, 3 questions per topic. So that's roughly 9 questions for task 1. And examiners don't usually allow you to finish your responses. Like when I took the examination, I noticed the examiner frequently interrupted and interfered and threw the next question after roughly 30 seconds. So what about your experience taking IELTS at home?
Well, maybe it was just luck, but my examiner was a very nice person, very very comforting, and I felt really at ease. So from the time we started, it's the same thing. There were 3 questions, part 1, but the examiner allowed me to finish. In part 2, of course, the instruction is to finish it in 2 minutes. So you have to finish it in 2 minutes. And for part 3, there were no timed, but I think because of your constant practice during your review, you kind of know exactly that you're supposed to end within 5 minutes. But the examiner was quite, as I said, nice about it, and it really made me feel comfortable. So it was easy to, like the way we're doing now.
For speaking task 2, you're given a task card and then you're allowed to prepare for 1 minute. And then for the actual delivery, 1 to 2 minutes. So when I first took the examination more than a decade ago, like several years ago, there was a timer. So the examiner gets to see the time, I get to see the time as well. But because now it's IELTS at home, is there a stopwatch or a timer that you get to see?
Actually, none. You're instructed for 2 minutes, and then the examiner just said, okay, we're done. And then you move on to the next question.
Okay, so for task 3, obviously this is the follow-up round. If it's IELTS on paper or IELTS on computer, task 3 lasts for about 5 minutes. So usually whatever answers you give in task 2, they're typically the basis of the examiner to ask follow-up questions in task 3. Was this also your experience in IELTS at home?
Actually, no, because for part 2, we talked about bags, okay, which is easy because I love bags. But for part 3, we talked about just about anything like music and hobbies, and so they were not connected, but somehow it seemed like, at least in terms of topics, it seemed like these are things that you do on your leisure time. So
I took the IELTS twice. One academic, one general training. For my first IELTS, I took it with British Council. For my second IELTS, I took it with IDP. But I noticed a similarity. Like task 1, around 9 questions. And then task 2, 1 general task card. And then task 3, roughly 5 questions. So that's 9 plus 1 plus 5, around 15 questions for the entire duration of the speaking test, which lasted for about 11 to 14 minutes. Would you say you were asked roughly the same number of questions, like 15 in the entire speaking examination?
I think thereabouts. Because every once in a while, the examiner would try to clarify some of my answers.
So guys, you've heard the similarities and the differences when you're taking IELTS on paper, IELTS on computer, or IELTS at home. Before we wrap up this discussion of the speaking subtest, Ms. Stel, anything else to share regarding speaking for IELTS at home?
Okay. So, well, actually, I did not expect the task of the test itself to be relatively easy, but because, again, as I mentioned, the examiner was really comforting. It helps that it eased my nerves, and at the same time, I just tried to be calm and just have presence of mind so that I am aware of the time and I am aware of my speaking. And I think everybody will do good with it.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Stel. So guys, because we're done with the speaking subtest, in the next 3 videos, we're going to talk about the components of the written exam. So we're going to talk about listening, reading, and writing. They're coming up next. Thank you.